Hello, Ed.
Hello, Jeff.
Hello, Christian. Hello, Tom. Hello, Matt. Hello, Kristen.
Hello, guys.
Hello, guys.
Hi.
Okay, Alliance, this is the first Salon episode of the Lincoln Review podcast. We're going to give this a shot. I hope it works. This is an experiment. Let me start off by saying thank you for coming and welcome. We have with us today Tom and Matt, who helped out on my campaign 5 years ago, which is how I know them. Christian, who was Mass GOP operative for many years, and Kristen, who has also helped out in certain circles of GOP activity. And Matt and Tom worked for my campaign, and then they went off to law school, and then they lost their way. I don't even know what happened. But we're here to talk about a few things, actually. But I wanted to actually... I'm going to start off to both of you. It's a question to both of you. When you left, I guess, undergrad and you went off to law school, what did anything change about your politics from then to now?
You want to go first, Tom?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say anything changed about my politics, but I think going to law school kind of broadened my view of certain issues, and so I think I see things from a different perspective. I don't feel differently at the core about any particular issues, but I think just looking at things through a lawyer's lens, I think has kind of moved me a little more toward the center than I once was.
When we get into arguments on Facebook, and you, Matt, as well, it's usually about some constitutional issue. So has anything changed from that perspective, from when you were originally, I mean, before you went to law school, after post-law school? What's the mindset that they're I won't say that they're teaching necessarily, but what's the attitude on campus, if there is an attitude towards a political ideology? I mean, is it just standard left-leaning academia, or is there a more specific?
I think there's a good balance. I mean, I had professors in law school who were, way far to the left. I also had some that were right of Attila the Hun. So it's, it's. I think there's a good balance. I don't think they discourage any particular viewpoint. I think what they're trying to do in law school is teach people how to think, not what to think. So in that respect, that's kind of the way I felt about it. But I don't know, Matt, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think really the mode of thinking in law school is quite a bit different than you would get in other avenues of education. It's hypercritical about the smallest things. And so when somebody makes even the slightest broad statement or makes something that could be at all interpreted as a stereotype, we are hypercritical of that. And I think it's regardless of what type of law school, who is actually teaching that. It's about being hypercritical about everything that everyone says. So that might be perceived as being liberal or being perceived as, I don't know what it's being perceived as, but it's certainly, I think it's less certainly do with politics and more about questioning everything.
Well, because you're taught to debate and argue both sides of it.
Right. Yeah.
And sometimes it's just fun to play devil's advocate, even if you don't feel some way about a particular issue. You want to entertain both sides. And I think, before law school, I was very much of a one-sided mindset. I didn't even bother to get to understand the other side, what the other side was arguing. And so now I'm a little more, I guess, sympathetic.
If there's more sympathy, or maybe not sympathy, but has anybody ever convinced you from a preconceived notion that you had before?
I mean, definitely, I'd say so. I can't really think of one off the bat right now. I'm sure I will, but
well, when Jeff was talking about constitutional issues, I think that is especially changed since I've gone to law school. So in politics, I think things are looked at as sort of just cultural and social issues. When they're put in a law school context, they are attached to a constitution. They're attached to the text of the Constitution and the what the framers originally thought in legislative history, and well, at least from my perspective, a lot of what is perceived or whatever is in the cultural lexicon is actually a lot different than what our Constitution says and what our Supreme Court has said.
Can I jump in?
Yeah,
here,
of
Christine?
course.
First of all, I think this is great. I mean, we all meet a lot of people who are into politics to all different degrees, and I think one of the most interesting things about somebody is sort of like, how do they approach politics? Like in law, you have jurisprudence, which is sort of like, how do you approach the law? And in politics, we don't have a word for that. We should, which is say like sort of, well, where do your politics come from? What are you loyal to? What processes do you go through? And I have a lot of friends who are lawyers, and it's true, they kind of go about it differently, whether it's they're used to sort of like laying a foundation for something, whether they're trying to, say, source their beliefs in, like stare decisis, previous things. I think they just have a different mental process around politics. And I think it's refreshing because a lot of our politics, as you say, is something else. Tribal membership, it's cultural things, it's nothing to do with that. It doesn't mean that it's wrong, but I do think how people approach politics is really interesting. And I'm since I know you guys only online, I think you're sort of filling in, who you are to me is interesting. Because I know who Kristen is, and I like her. Because I hope we get to her really
That's
soon.
good. It's good that he likes
because
you, right?
I meant that I would like her if I didn't also respect how she thinks about politics. But I think, because I know her better than you two, I know why I like her. Now I'm learning why I like you guys. Kristen, I may decide not to like you, but I had strong opinions about these three coming in, and I think this is great. I do think it's interesting to ask people, how do you do politics? Where does it come from? And I think that can give really revealing answers in terms of how they do politics that you wouldn't get from just listening to their views on the latest whatever.
Oh boy, I'm stalling out on what I was going to say, but you brought something up, the constitutionality of it. Does anybody ever just step back? I mean, especially when we get into the Facebook discussions about, and maybe people out there can relate, when a constitutional decision comes down from the Supreme Court and it's a 5-4 decision. Every single time that one of those happens, and especially 5-4, I always wonder when either you or I get into it, or you and somebody else get into it, does anybody ever just gut check and go, you realize it was 5-4? The greatest legal minds in the land don't even agree on such a critical issue, because this is one thing where it's this is Ed and I. This is a Republican podcast, but we'll have on anybody who's intelligent and can have a good
we're right about everything.
Yeah, and can have a good conversation about it. So it's not like we're excluding anybody. We'd love to include everybody. But when we get down to say constitutional issues, it's decided 5-4. That a single issue can be thought of so differently by the Supreme Court. Does that ever come up in your practice? Not necessarily law school, but is there the reflection by lawyers go, hey, look, these guys thought one way, these guys thought the other, and whether it's talking about legalizing same-sex marriage, whether it's talking about Second Amendment issues, or even property rights.
Well, I think it depends on the context. The context is very important, because if we're arguing over a political issue that's tied to a Supreme Court decision, then yeah, I mean, I think you have to give mind to the fact that it was a split decision. But if you're talking about if the subject of the discussion is what should the law be on this, a 5-4 decision is just as binding as a 9-0 decision. So, it really depends. I mean, I think it depends on which perspective you're taking, where you're coming to this subject from.
When I've thought about it, and this came up in some article I read recently of like, when did it all change? Because when it was straight politics. Because now I just see it as it's politics. However you feel about an issue, however the justice feels about an issue, that's the way they're going to decide whether they like. And 5-4 decisions on major issues, I think, are emblematic of that. Am I crazy? Am I wrong? Was it always that way?
You're crazy and wrong.
All right.
But,
speaking in the mic and tell me why.
Well, Kristen, do you want to jump in here? I mean, I actually know a bit about Supreme Court history, but if you want to jump in and go right ahead, I'll hand it off to you.
So actually, not to reference other podcasts, but there is another podcast.
You can
who's-
reference any podcast.
I know, but you know. There was one about the Supreme Court that I was listening to not that long ago, and it's always the perception that the court is political. I think it was the Brandeis Court was known to be very political, where there were a lot of split decisions, and the justices often disagreed.
So, is that just where we are, though? I mean, it
The
almost
the pu-
bothers me,
the
though.
public has changed. So the history of the Supreme Court shows that the ideology of the justices is the most reliable way to figure out what their view would be on controversial cases. I mean, the majority of Supreme Court cases are unanimous. Most cases involve things that Joe Sixpack doesn't know about, tax things. You know, these guys know all this, but it's always been political to some degree. I think what's changed is the kinds of cases that are reaching the Supreme Court. The number of cases they consider changes, but the big change has been in how the public perceives their role and how we talk about the Supreme Court. That has been the major recent change, and that has affected their legitimacy, and we haven't had that before. So from us sitting here in your backyard, the Supreme Court looks very political, but yet if you would take...
But
if Jeff and I were
everybody's an armchair justice when these decisions come down on Facebook.
But the point is, if we were
We're
all
all
transported
constitutional
back,
authority.
if we were transported back to the 1950s, we're talking the Supreme Court, we would say the court's pretty political because we would bring our views of the court to the 1950s. But nobody would have agreed with us at the time. They might not have liked some of the decisions, but the point is that we've changed. The court really hasn't changed much in terms of what they bring to the decisions. But the public now sees the court as a political organization, and that is new, and that's really bad. And I think that's worth talking about.
Yeah, I'm sure that people in the South in the 1950s seeing National Guard being called in front of their schools and George Wallace standing in front of doorways would have certainly thought the Supreme Court was political. There's no doubt about that. So I don't really think it's changed in that way. I think it is a lot of what you said, Ed, is that it is people being able to comment on these sort of things a lot more. It's funny because I read SCOTUS blog almost incessantly especially during these times when new decisions are coming out, and I realize some stuff, and even as being an attorney. But the fact is that a lot of these decisions very complex and they're very difficult to understand. But there are now sources and avenues of finding actually delving into these and making them understandable to the general public. I'm not sure that was available a lot. You know,
probably not.
This is something. It's everyone can now make a moral judgment on these decisions now, and whether they like them or not. There's just a lot more information.
You could also gather the resources to challenge them. I don't think that the public would have been able to say, I'm going to get the resources and the cases and the history of these cases and then look up everything this justice said and find out, my God, he says something different here. I don't know if I agree with that. I think you have a kind of a standing, to use a legal term, to criticize the court that I think would have been kind of uncommon 50 years ago. So I do think that in the same way that we are a nation of armchair political activists, we're becoming a nation of armchair, justices ourselves, feeling the fact that I can read all that case law and I can make a decision. I think that's kind of new.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, nobody was going to go into a library and open up the books and read it 50 years ago to try to understand what these decisions meant. And and I think another thing is, as lawyers, you're inclined more to want the court not to appear political, because it kind of it kind of takes away from, I guess, legitimacy of our profession a little bit, to think that the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, is just a purely political body. And I think just our idealism makes us not want to see it that way. But in reality, I think there are political aspects to it.
Wait, Christian,
Christian
grab the mic, and then we'll go with Christian.
Yeah.
Well, the reason that the justices are appointed for life are so they don't have to be beholden to the president who appointed them, to the popular politics of the day. So they can think about the longer term policy implications of the laws that they're making, and think about the big picture of what they're doing.
Hey, Christian, you want to
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but when did that politicization start? I mean, back in the day, before Bork, were judges seen, was this nomination process seen as political as it was?
I would have said, to me, I mean, there was stuff with Nixon
Yeah.
prior to that, but the real change was Bork, and I think that flipped politics to where that's the. If you study history a little bit more, and you really people always talk about it, how it wasn't that divisive 40 years ago. I could see that, and then, but really, when Bork happened, and then Newt happened, and then it just kind of, Clinton impeachment, it kind of spawns from there, where it was Bork because, and if you, I didn't even know this. I learned this. There's a good documentary out about Watergate, and I didn't even know this, that Bork was the only guy that Nixon could find to replace.
He was the Solicitor General.
Solicitor General at the time because of Watergate. Nobody else was willing to do it. Nobody else was willing to step up and do it because of Watergate. And Bork was the only guy, and that put it in good context for in the 80s when Kennedy and Biden blocked him for. I mean, he was well qualified to do it, but they just didn't like the guy.
Right.
Which I didn't know that. I didn't know his connection to Nixon at the time. I hadn't studied that far back in history. But I think, Tom, you're right. It's sad when you get to that point and you realize that it could just be political, or even if it's not, it appears that way,
right.
and it delegitimizes the decision, and it just makes it so that. Well, we just got to win the next election to get a person that thinks like us in there. And I think, though, a lot of the times with this is a plan for progressives. They go through the judiciary to kind of, if they can't get it through the legislative branch, they go through the judiciary. But now we have, as of the recording of this podcast, Kennedy is stepping down. He announced that.
I actually,
he's
we just read something in Above the Law that I guess clerks of his are saying that the story's greatly over-exaggerated.
Oh, okay.
So
all right,
he may
that's
not.
why we don't like to do news here on the podcast.
Right.
But it does. When it comes down to election time, you think about that Supreme Court seat as something that is
Big thing Trump ran on last year.
yeah.
But I think that's new. I mean, I've been watching politics for 30 years now. I don't remember Supreme Court appointees being this much of an issue this often. I think one of the things that's happened with the court is that we're living in a time of incredible change, and I think that that's driving a lot of our politics in terms of, we're more globally connected. There's civil rights issues are changing more often. I just think there's so much going on, and I think the court is sort of seen as more powerful and important by the public than it used to be, because the court can do things quicker than our gridlocked federal government can. I just think the court is sort of is in the middle of this maelstrom of change in America, and I think that they're perceived as a public as having this really important role that's actually greater than the legislature for certain kinds of changes. And I think that watching the impact, I mean, I know there have always been important Supreme Court decisions, but it seems to me the fact that the ones that have changed America are happening more rapidly than before. I mean, we can also, we can rattle off famous court cases in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, but I feel like that I could name like 15 of them in the past 10 years alone that have really changed the country. And I think that it seems to me the fact that they're having more of an impact on our lives than they used to, even if that's just perception.
Recently, so Ed and I are Generation Xers. How old are you, Christian?
37.
37. You're a Gen Xer. Millennials, right? No?
28.
Correct.
Yes, millennials. Okay. The Supreme Court came out with a decision, luckily, 9-0, saying, hey, yeah, America, you still have free speech, right? Hate speech is free speech, and you can't really define hate speech.
Right.
So, I mean, we'll maybe jump off of the Supreme Court discussion, but more into... I want to get your perspective, and, well, I guess everybody's perspective, on the way they're seeing this it's baffling to me. I mean, you guys are the most recent out of school. The idea that the concept of hate speech and free speech and the suppression of free speech on a campus. Look, I'm 40 years old. I think you look back and you remember, you think college was yesterday because it was one of the best times of your lives, and it was never this bad. There was always lefty activists and conservative activists on campus, but I mean, you guys are a few years out of law school, a few years out of college. Was it this bad?
Well, can I premise this? I mean, and establish the premises here, because I mean, this, and I know of the three attorneys here, this is going to be a little bit of an issue because this idea, this concept of free speech is actually, and we were talking about parsing words and getting to an understanding of what actually something means. Free speech in of itself is 90% of the time when people have political discussions is not actually what free speech is. Okay, so when we're talking about speech on campus and things like that, okay, we're not talking actually about free speech. Okay?
Get into it. What is it?
Unless it's a public university, that's another.
Unless
issue,
it's a
but-
public,
maybe.
Yeah,
exactly,
because-
that's even a quasi institution.
Right.
There has to be a government actor. So, as much as we want to get into the constitutionality of that, now we can just discuss it.
No, I don't actually don't want to get into the
Okay.
constitutionality
All right,
because no, the
so that's
constitutionality of it is cut and dry to me. I
Okay.
agree.
That's cloud the issue sometimes.
Yeah, no,
It certainly does.
No, when people get fired because they say something stupid publicly, and it's not looked upon by their company or by polite society as something that you should say, yeah, every company has every right to do that. That's not protected speech. You're not protected from free speech. Government censoring you is the idea of a government entity. However, I mean there's middle ground. I mean, I won't say middle ground. There's gray area of protesters shutting down free speech. I mean, nowhere in the Constitution does it says you have the right to necessarily protest. That's not in there. And protesting somebody else,
You do have a right
to redress grievances.
You do have a right to protest against the government. You don't have a right to protest against your employer per se.
But if your employee, like, so, if 20 protesters showed up and started yelling so we couldn't record the podcast because it was just that popular, that was
That's the goal here.
Yeah,
There you go.
that can't be something that's legal. I mean that you're getting into the somebody else impeding my rights. Now, is the government obligated to protect that? So, for instance, the riots out in Berkeley.
This is what the lawyer's saying. Jeff, there's a huge amount of case law on exactly all these kinds of disputes here.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't matter. But that's irrelevant. But
I'm just laughing because we have all these lawyers here who sat through all these classes about all these free speech tests and private actors and whether or not you can put signs on telephone poles.
do
all
the
these
cops?
I'm good not talking about that.
Do
anymore.
No, but
I
the
love
cops
talking about
the cops out at Berkeley, for whatever reason, and you can play both sides, and I don't want to necessarily litigate it, but is there?
Invited lawyers, you're going to get litigation.
Yeah. But well, Christian, I don't know. It seems rather. There seems there be a generational divide between, and I'm not saying present company accepted, but people are more willing to censor other people's speech or the idea of what other people can say compared to a generation before. Am I off base here? Do you see it? You're closer to it. We've had college Republicans on before. We had younger.
But polling shows this. Actually, just back up here, that polling shows that people think that because of concerns about civil rights and the ability to be heard, that perhaps it's okay to restrain someone else's ability to speak. They're not saying the government should do it, but they mean just as a general cultural concept. Polling shows that has changed. People are more willing to say, hey, maybe you should be pushed aside a little bit to let these people speak who never get to speak. So the culture's been changed. The polling shows us that does not mean that our rights have changed, but I do think that there is a difference in how people view the issue of who gets to speak and who should sit there and listen, and that is a cultural change, not a legal change.
As the youngest of the Gen Xers, are you seeing it or no?
I mean, it seems to me, I don't remember, 10, 15 years ago hearing about safe spaces. People, there being speech that, you shouldn't be allowed to say something because I'm going to be offended. It seems to me at some point over the last, 10, 15, maybe even 5 years, there's been a point where we've gone from the right to free speech to people are now having a right to not be offended. I don't know when that changed, but that's just the way I'm seeing it. I don't remember things being this crazy in college. I mean, we would protest the college Democrats. The college Democrats would protest us, but there was never a discussion over whether or not we had a right to speak or a right to be there.
Tom, you're nodding your head.
I mean, I got to agree. It's even when I was in college, I graduated 6 years ago from undergrad, and it wasn't that bad. I had never heard of a safe space either, even when I was in college. I think this is a very new phenomenon.
So this is really new.
This is very new, yeah, and I think it's just a result of I guess the further polarization, the trend that's been going on for the last 10, 20 years of the hyper partisan hyper polarization in our in our body politic. And I think it's I think people are becoming less tolerant of what the other side has to say, partially because it might be a sensitivity thing, but I think also because people actually are moving further and further apart from each other. And I just I'm not. I don't know. How was it at BU? Was it the same?
I think it's definitely changed. I don't think it has anything to do with polarization, though. I think as it usually is with the progression, which a lot of people, especially the people that are proponents of safe space, would say that it's just a progression of society, where things that were before were you were able to talk about, now you're not able to talk about, because now we're concerned about people's feelings or life experiences. We're just more concerned about that.
But where do you draw the line? You're not necessarily. You're not making the case for it. You're just pointing out why it is.
I'm not making the case for. Well, it depends. Here's the thing. So I can understand why, if you're in a class and you want to, for example, okay, I'll give you an example. So there was times where we're talking about criminal law or evidence in which the subject of rape comes up, and the professor would give a warning to students in the class that the subject of rape and what can happen during a rape and what is necessary to prove a rape at trial is going to be presented at class, because we're going to be reading a case study. Okay, they do that for the very fact that there might be people that are victims of sexual assault in that particular class. I can't say that I don't understand that. I do understand.
No, that's fine.
That is fine.
That's. I.
But what you're literally doing there is creating a safe space. So this is my point. I think people sort of, and this is just very typical of literally everything in society, we take the very extremes of these safe spaces and we declare that this is prevalent through the entire education system. When in reality, it's just it's an acknowledgement that there are people that are different and they're having different experiences.
But there's a difference there, because I've read of the scenario that you're talking about, and I can respect them saying, okay, we're going to be discussing these subjects. It could be graphic. Here, be forewarned. But that's where it ends. I have read about situations where they try to say, well, no, let's not cover that because it is might be triggering to those to people. It may be. Now, is there a consensus that obviously that's a step too far? That no, these subjects need to be taken and talked about and considered in a serious manner, and they need to be discussed, and you can't censor it in a sense.
Well, without knowing exactly which topics you're talking about.
Well, no, I believe it was I don't know if it was at the school, or for BU or whatever, but I do remember reading articles about that specific rape case law, where there was a push to not have the specific aspects of it talk because it could be triggering beyond the warning.
Right. So, and let me give you an example. So, what I just spoke about in terms of that actually happened, and it is coming from literally, as the Boston Globe described in 2014, the most liberal school in America, which is Northeastern School of Law. It has been described as the most liberal school in America.
That's where Dukakis. No, not School of Law. We just
public
interviewed Dukakis. You guys should feel honored. We interviewed Michael Dukakis on the see of
Nice.
Lincoln Review.
Used to
see him on campus.
He needs 6 of us just to fill him.
But it doesn't mean those subjects weren't broached. They absolutely were. And it's because the professors are professors and they realize that you need to speak about things. Now,
right.
When it does get to the point where those things are eliminated from the curriculum, I think you have a serious problem, and I would agree to that. But my only experience is with the most liberal school in the country, and it's not doing that, I have a hard time believing that it's so prevalent that it has to be talked about on cable news all the time.
Is it prevalent? how prevalent is it across the board for not just the specific example, but the broader example where
I mean, I don't know.
you're getting into censorship on campus?
I mean, I don't know.
I'm
how,
not.
I don't know how widespread it is on campus, at least from professors. But someone was writing it in Berkeley for some reason. I mean, I'm no big Ann Coulter fan, but someone thought that what she was going to be saying was so offensive that she didn't even have the right to say it. And no, this was not a class where people had to be in the class to get credit.
No, it was
It was
yeah.
yeah. It was
Attend at your
it was
own
just a speech.
volition.
So I can see the logic behind a professor saying, "Look, we're going to be talking about rape. This is a tough case. Just know that going in. That's fine." But then it's a whole nother level to whether it's students, professors, people thinking what she's saying is so offensive that she doesn't even have a right to say it.
But there's a two things I want to say. One, I'm going to put in the back burner, which is that I think some of this is theatrical. It's what's happened to a lot of town hall meetings. People are sort of looking for a venue to clash, to put it in social media and become famous. I do think there's a theatrical piece to this. So if Ann Coulter's book was read aloud by someone other than her in front of a group, there wouldn't be the protest and the clash, even though her speech should be heard on campus. There's something about her being there, the clash, the social media, the screaming, that wouldn't happen if her views were expressed by someone else. So I do think there's a theatrical piece to this that's ruining it. In the same way the town halls are often getting ruined by the show up, make a lot of noise, take pictures,
Yeah.
put them on Twitter. So I think that's part of this too. But the more important thing I wanted to say was about the cultural context here. If a person says, "Hey, we're going to talk about some really rough things here. If you've gone through these things, man, just be aware of it." I wouldn't mind that. But I have an entire vocabulary around microaggressions and triggers and all that. And Ben Sass's latest book, The Senator from Nebraska, is about, kind of like the vanishing adult. I think most people believe that young people today, whether it's true or not, I think it's true, but believe that young people today just aren't as robust or as resilient, that they've been coddled, that they're not living the kinds of rough lives we used to live, whatever that means. And that
I know exactly.
we sort of have these,
think
we
of
sort of have all
examples of
these
what it
wimpy
means.
18, 19, and 20-year-olds who just can't handle life. And I think it's
Well,
and Ben Sass's book is-
it would be one thing if this were not anecdotal, but you watch the crazy videos of these kids on campus, absolutely losing their minds over the most mundane, relatively mundane topics, where I imagine most of the campus is probably normal, and they were brought up in reasonable households, and that they are not. But there is some kind of indulgence where you read about if they are traumatized by the presence of somebody else or words being spoken by some guest speaker, and then they're given crayons and coloring books, and these are
Sometimes
real. This
literally
is real
crayons.
things.
I've heard-
Yeah, these are real things that are paid for by their tuition dollars. I have to go. Okay, you know what? Maybe I'm the grumpy old man here, but that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
You're
Now,
sitting on your lawn. You can order us off at any time.
yeah,
anytime.
yeah, well, I may do that.
But look, I want to. You're right, but I do think the reason why Ben Sass's book is doing so well is people do believe people are reaching adulthood without having the resilience of adults, and I think you can't take the campus microaggression shutting down thing out of the context. The fact that the older white men like ourselves believe that this next generation, not you guys necessarily, but I don't know you that well, just can't handle what
There'll
we
be
think
old
we can
white
handle.
men someday too.
So I just think that there is that context, and I think that if it was the 1970s and we were still all rough Americans waiting for Ronald Reagan to arrive, I think that these comments in class wouldn't be that bad. But I think because we think everyone's becoming a wimp now at a young age, we're saying, of course they can't handle. What is a microaggression again? I just think that you can't take it out of
it's
that.
even in the name, micro. It's so small. It's not
Very
even a
80s
small
word. It's
aggression.
trivial,
It's a
yeah.
microaggression. It's a trivial thing. And when I've heard examples of it, people commenting on people's hair that might not look like them. If they're a minority, they comment on their looks, or they're not sure about language they might speak. Okay, so they're relatively innocent slips of decorum, but they are very small ones. They're micro. But that's now a concept, and that's
blown
how.
out of proportion on social media. On social media,
But
it can be a
guys,
big
there's your
deal.
problem.
Yeah.
Can I just talk about the sort of weird dichotomy that's going here, because you guys are talking about microaggressions and it is obviously affecting you. It's literally affecting you because you guys, and I've heard this podcast before, you've talked about this so many times. So
In
where
what?
does it become literally you're the one that's triggered by these things? I mean, that's the way I
Am
look
I
at it.
triggered
It's like,
by?
It's
well,
not that big of a deal. Like if these
No,
people
it is
want
a
to
big
live
deal.
in their lives and they want to say, okay, I don't want to be affected by these microaggressions. How does it affect you?
because they're asking people to change their behavior because of their feelings. That's the difference.
I mean, but actually, you're asking those people to change their behavior. Like
No,
I
I'm at. Well,
honestly-
no.
Listen,
Well, I'm at.
Going around in circles.
Sorry, go ahead. No.
I was going to say, so I understand. I have a problem too if these students are going in and disrupting the middle of a speech. Even if you want to like get away from the political correctness, quote unquote, issue of it. It's rude and it's not productive. But at the end of the day, if they're standing outside the building protesting, no matter how wrong they think they are, I don't care. They can think whatever they want, and that's the
But
great thing about living here.
But there's a difference between thinking, there's a difference between saying, and then there's a difference between acting on that. If somebody is offended by a perceived microaggression on their part, okay, why? I'd say so. All right, so say somebody's perceived that, okay, that really offended me. We talk it through. I'd say, okay, you know what? Maybe I'm more educated on the subject. But then it goes a step further, where there's punitive damages or there's policies put in place that say you can't discuss X because we don't want you to discuss X. That's what I'm talking about. That's my pushback. I don't have. If I'm triggered by anything, I'm triggered by that. I'm triggered by the idea that somebody wants to put forth a law, a rule, or stop somebody from making the mistake rather than discussing it openly.
Name one law or one rule that's ever been put forth in Congress or any other legislative body that would prevent that happening. And two, what situation other than the Berkeley situation are we talking about? When was the last time that
Yale.
somebody said that you?
They banned
Oh my
Halloween.
God, okay.
Matt, they banned Halloween costumes at Yale. I'm sorry. I'm not saying that that's an important thing to do. But if they're successful at doing that, that's an actual problem. Those people are going to graduate, and then they're going to think that they can start banning other things.
But you're literally
And
talking out of two sides of the different coin. You're marginalizing the schools, saying that they don't know like how the real world is, but then you want to tell them how to act when they're in school. Which one do you want? I mean,
do I want to tell them how they want to act in school.
right? You're telling them that they can't ban somebody from speaking at their
Yes.
university.
Yes.
Okay.
If that's me telling them that they're not allowed to ban somebody or shut down somebody else's speech, if that's me being triggered, fine. Point seated. I'm going to say. I mean, we'll circle it back to the beginning of the conversation. Tom, are you itching to jump in here? Are you no?
I mean,
He's like, I want none of
he was perking up. So
I have concrete concerns. That my concerns are that, and I see it sometimes that these different social norms about talking about politics are then going with these kids as they graduate and get older and enter other levels of government, local, state, federal. And I'm concerned the fact that some of these norms are going to have consequences in the government context that I live in. Do I care what's happening in Berkeley? No, I don't care. Or Sarah Lawrence or the Northeastern School of Law. I'm not particularly worried about that. But I would be worried that if I was at a town hall meeting where I live now and I started talking and some people said, I'm going to shut you down because I learned how to do that on campus.
there's some videos
and,
of that. Yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
concerned that there is an effect on norms. Do I think it's that important to me? No. Do I think conservatives spend way too much time talking about college campus free speech? Absolutely. They spend way too much time on it. But when I do talk about it, I do say, do what you want on campus, but I'm worried that you're going to sort of change the norms around talking about politics. I see it on Twitter. I see it in Facebook. You see people using the same tactics in terms of arguing against you or saying that you're not being legitimate. Some person told me that me saying on Facebook that people should get jobs they're qualified for was a microaggression because I didn't realize that statement was loaded with pre-existing notions about what qualifications mean in a patriarchal system. And I'm like, where did you learn that? So, again, I'm not saying extreme examples are what everybody's thinking. I just mean that I'm worried that young people are not as robust as I'd like them to be, and I'm worried that their norms around politics will eventually infringe upon me in some other context, but I'm with you, Matt. I don't think it's a big deal.
And get off my lawn.
To be fair, isn't this what every generation says about the next generation, that they're not
Golden
as
rule.
robust as they used to be?
Sure.
Yeah,
Golden
I'd
Yes,
agree with that.
conceded.
Yep.
We'll all stipulate that since we have lawyers here.
No, that's I think the point of this podcast is what I'm trying to do with it anyway. I think what Ed and I, when we originally set out to do it, was to speak in a calm manner, not shout. If you have a political position, any position, and you want to express it intelligently and not try to censor the other person. I think that's what it's all. This I would hope this podcast is emblematic of free speech. But you know, I have seen a decided shift in culture, and you know, Tom, it could be, you know, you pointed out, you know, 5-6 years ago, you were in school, so it's relatively new. You know, the cultural norms are changing.
I think norms around talking politics are changing,
And I'd like to change them back.
I don't think it's changing. I don't think it's changing because of the college campus. I think that our norms change for lots of reasons. I just see the campus as a minor reservoir of change of norms in politics. I think other things are much more important. How you talk about politics and the college campus thing. But of course, if you turn on Fox, it's all about the college campuses and it's not about other things. But I do think it's interesting to see that talking about politics now, to me, as a 45-year-old guy, looks very different than when I was 30, 25, 20, and 15. I do think that it's very different now. And I like to go around and sort of ask people, like, you know, have you seen changes? And do you feel more or less? I feel less comfortable talking about politics than I did 5, 10 years ago. And I'm pretty moderate because I think like the context is changing. I'm not happy about what I've seen. So I'm not going to say blankly I want to go back to what we had, but I am a little uncomfortable with how politics kind of is right now. So I'll go around. Kristen, you want to start?
It seems to me that, you know, maybe it's the thing with social media, but, you know, 10 years ago you could actually have a political discussion even if you disagreed with someone. And now you try to have a political debate, political discussion, you know, online or in person, or, you know, within 5 minutes, Goodwin's Law comes up and someone's Hitler. You know, I don't remember, you know, I mean,
I never get called Hitler, by the way, but go on.
yeah, like you just must not be.
You
trying hard
haven't.
enough.
You
You're
need
not
to
trying
spend more
hard
time
enough.
online.
Yeah, like you know, maybe I'm naive, but I don't remember. I know they called Reagan a cowboy who was going to nuke the world. I don't remember them calling him Hitler. I don't think they called.
True.
Don't think they called. You know,
George W. Bush, they called Hitler.
George W. Bush they called Hitler. Don't remember them calling Clinton. They called Clinton a lot.
Ed, can you hand me a Sam Light?
Yes.
Why are you
that's
doing
a
that to
that's a
yourself?
free plug for Sam Adams
you go.
Light.
We are open to
I mean,
sponsorships.
but
by the way.
I think maybe part of the reason is, you know, whether it's 24-hour news and, you know, they're always looking for something, so they're always going to be, you know, they can't replay the same thing, so they're going to, instead of having 2 hours of content to fill, they've got 24 hours of content to fill, so they're going to be needling down the tiniest little thing, or it's social media, and there's the anonymity of being online, and we're just used to screaming at each other. But to me, it's just doesn't seem like we can have a conversation like the way that we used to. Like something like this, where we're actually talking with each other, even though we might disagree, it's a rarity, and that's kind of a shame.
Yeah, Matt, were you gonna say Matt and Kristen?
Well, like what you were talking about, I think a lot of it has to do with the 24-hour news networks. If you watch something like, if you go back and watch William Buckley's Firing Line versus turn on Fox any day, and it's
yes.
totally different. It's
Yeah.
totally different. It's just, like even if you watch Buckley, is just so much more nuanced,
Erudite.
making like laid out arguments. It's
Yep.
less screaming over each other. Even when he gets to the point where he's screaming over each other, it's still not the same as what's happening now on network TV.
So when he called,
Wait, you got it. Go on.
So when he called, what's his face? The
Gore
Gore
Vidal.
Vidal.
a queer. Was that?
Well, to be fair, Gore had just called him a crypto Nazi.
So that's my exact point.
Yeah.
So as much as we think that it's now you just talked about calling somebody a Nazi.
Yeah.
It literally started all the way back there.
Well, but there's a good point. Actually, Ed and I did a podcast on this a year or so ago. We did.
Well, on the documentary, yes.
Yeah,
we did.
there's a documentary
that's
on
a good one.
There's a documentary on Netflix called Best of Enemies, and it's about the Gore Vidal Bill Buckley debates in '68. Yeah, the '68 convention. Now, Firing Line had actually been on for 2 years. It started in '66, but they go into the documentary. It's a great documentary. If you are a political junkie, you will love this. Both sides of the aisle. And he said he wouldn't debate two people. He wouldn't debate a communist, and he wouldn't debate Gore Vidal. And they actually got him on
that kind of redundant?
on the episode. Vidal. I wouldn't call him a communist. Back then, communist actually meant
Yeah.
something. Now, actually, there's too many communists.
I mean, Matt, you refer to that incident, but I think at that time that's more of the exception
That was
rather
the
than
outlier.
the
He-
rule.
he
It's now
said
the
he-
rule
he-
that just happens.
But
all the time.
we went to a screening of it in Cambridge, Ed and I.
I felt very unsafe in that space, by the way.
Yeah, right.
Our
But it
house
was-
in Cambridge, believe me, I
it
didn't
was
feel
by the-
I
comfortable.
live
by
in
the
Cambridge.
the
How do you think I
directors-
feel?
The directors were hosting a screening of it, and I got to actually ask him a couple questions. But they did point out that was one of Bill Buckley's biggest regrets, was that he had gotten too aggravated. He let Vidal get under his skin, and he called him a queer, and then he threatened to punch him in the goddamn face. Interestingly, a couple miles from here, Noam Chomsky, he jokingly said the same thing. Chomsky had no clue. When you go back and watch those Firing Line episodes, all episodes of Firing Line are now on YouTube. I am watching them in chronological order because my hammock in this lovely backyard.
I can't imagine the effect on just politics, reviewing everything conservatives said in the 1960s.
It-
crying
it's-
out loud.
no, no,
I
no,
think
no.
we have a
It's
public interest in
fascinating.
stopping Jeff from watching these things. Holy cow!
It is fascinating. Please, if you
I'm
are
sure it is.
start at the very beginning, 1966,
Holy crap.
episode 1. We are arguing about the same things that we did 60 years
But the
ago.
left won most of those arguments by
No,
now.
no,
just
no,
for the
no, no.
record.
No, actually, it's a bit of a give and take. Culturally, a fair amount of the left has won. Politically, economically,
But I guess my point with that entire scenario was what you had Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley, who the two of the greatest orators, or in
Political history.
members
Yeah.
of
They were
the
an
highest
intellectual
debate
elite.
Right.
that you could ever see in American politics. And when it
wait a
all
minute. Are you about to slag off this podcast and say that we are not one of the intellectual
Oh no
elites
no 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 no! I'm not, I'm
Massachusetts
not
politics?
doing that. I don't think you're giving me credit for that.
But you are on
Uh,
it now. You're a part of the history
Well,
here.
yeah, so can't slander anything that I'm on. But no, the whole point is that even with that high level of discourse, they still ended up where they were. And even if it is his greatest regret, I just think, when you're on Facebook, you're not dealing with the likes of William F. Buckley and Gore Vidal. You're dealing with the average person. So it's just going to get to Nazi a
Yep.
lot quicker.
My favorite is, you've seen over the past, I don't know, since Trump was elected, the new favorite insult from both sides now is the snowflake thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if I hear one more person say snowflake, I'm just going to delete my Facebook.
Well, Ed,
You
Tom,
probably should anyway.
Tom broke the seal. He said the T word.
The what?
The T word. So now we got to go. Everybody take a sip.
Uh-oh.
And he said Trump, and we're going to get into
Oh,
it.
boy.
And I do think
Delicious.
Here we go.
I do think the politics is different. I think Trump has simply made the situation more extreme in terms of the rhetoric. But I'm glad we talked about it. I do think that things are different. I think that what was once an aberration with Gore Vidal and Buckley is now happening every week on our television screens. I do think that one of the problems I
the
have
worst aspect, there's no intelligence.
no, there isn't.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, not on the cable television. You can turn PBS in the middle of the night and you'll watch something smart, but nobody's watching that. I mean, it's out there, right? Think tanks do this. No one attends them. I mean, it's just, it doesn't capture the public's imagination the way that Firing Line did. So there's a question of of audience. So I do think it's great that we sort of get that, but I think degree matters. One of the problems I have with politics is people don't discuss, we either had this or didn't. Oh, it's bad now, but it was bad before. Oh, this person did that, but someone did that a long time ago, therefore it's okay. And I want to say, this is saying like a difference in degree becomes a difference in kind. That just because something like this happened 10 years ago doesn't mean that it's okay now, or having 10 times as much of it now is just the same as having 10% of it a while ago. I just think that something can be much worse than it was. Or just because we were this divided during the Civil War doesn't mean that it's okay during peace times to be this divided. I can't believe the arguments I hear out there about trying to justify this nightmare we have. I tell young people, I'm like, it really was never like this. Like, you guys are too young to remember. Like, I was a Republican when I was young. It felt great. I didn't feel like everybody in America hated me. I wasn't clashing with everybody. I didn't hate the media all the time. I'm like, I tell these young activists, like, you weren't there when it was good. You're watching Bob Dylan when he's 80 years old. I'm like, damn, I was there when he could actually sing properly. But you don't even remember that. So that's what it's like being a Republican, like a middle-aged man. I want to say, it was way cool when I was young, and you've just missed it. So I just think that like things have changed, but degrees matter. Just because Ronald Reagan was called an idiot once in a while was nothing like George Bush being called an idiot like every 5 seconds. I just think there was a big difference in how Reagan was criticized versus the way George Bush was criticized versus how Donald Trump is being criticized.
And then you watch. Well, you watch. That's. I mean, 2000 was when he got elected, and into 2001. I mean, that's. Fox News started in the late 90s, and it all kind of the 24-hour news cycle. CNN was the only one in the 80s, but in 90s, and then it just gushes from there. But I mean, well, Tom broke the seal and said Trump. Is everybody here still? Are you guys all Republicans, or do you ever change your registration?
When I moved back to Massachusetts from Florida, I registered as unenrolled, but I still consider myself a Republican.
But you're up in New Hampshire now, avoiding all those Massachusetts taxes. Are you independent up there?
I haven't registered yet, but I think I'm going to register as Republican because when I came back from Florida and had to re-register to vote up here, I was not happy with the way, the direction of the party and with Trump being the leading candidate for the nomination. And so I said to myself, I'm just going to go unenrolled, and that's kind of what I did. But I'm starting to come back to it now and say, okay, well, I might disagree with the majority of what the party thinks, but that doesn't mean I should leave. We need to have more voices within the Republican Party who support the president, who oppose the president, who, are all over the map on these issues, because I at the end of the day, I truly feel that we need to be a big tent party. And, my favorite pastime right now is criticizing the president, but at the same time,
more the vice president.
Well, yeah, we'll get into that. But yeah, I mean, it's it's just we need to, within the party and between parties, we need to start finding more commonalities and differences, I think.
Matt, Kirsten, are you still Republicans?
No, I've been unenrolled for a while now. I still have a very difficult time voting for a Democrat. I still don't think I've actually voted for a Democrat.
That just means you're sane.
Well, I did vote for Gary Johnson, so I don't know if that's...
Well, he was a Republican.
Yeah,
that's true.
You're not alone at this table.
I can't stand. I can't stand libertarians, but that's
Well, we
another
love
episode.
It was strictly keeping the third party on the ballot kind of vote. But no, I have not been a Republican for several years.
I unenrolled after the convention last year. I just became unenrolled. And then at the same time, too, in Massachusetts, it's kind of a practical matter. I couldn't vote in the mayoral primary because I was a registered Republican and there were only Democrats running. So
City of Boston?
Sorry?
City of Boston?
Yeah, City of Boston. So at the same time, it's
that's
sort
actually
of practical.
important. Yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
strategic. You need to almost do that.
But I mean, that's not. It isn't the reason that ultimately made me unenroll. It was sort of, if this party puts up this candidate as their candidate, someone who doesn't even represent Republican values, how can I be part of this? But like Matt, I don't think I've ever voted for a Democrat since I've been voting.
More
so.
sanity.
Same here.
What about you?
I was right there. I unenrolled for a while and re-enrolled as a Republican. Friend of mine is running for Young Republican office, so going to convention and helping her out. But at the end of the day, it's the same type of thing. I had, and I'll call it a hissy fit when Trump was nominated. I'm like, this is not my party. I don't want to belong to this. And I was still, as you know, I was still working for Republican candidates, for state offices, state
Right.
senators, state reps, that type of thing. But at the end of the day, we've got two choices. We can either, take our ball and go home, or we can try to fight for our party. I mean, if we leave the Republican Party, there's going to be no one who's arguing for the issues that are important to me. Like free trade, like a balanced budget. Do the things that Trump is wrong on. If we don't speak up, if we don't try to fight for it in the political party, where's that voice going to come
Tom,
from?
I mean, Tom brought it up, Ed. You and I are. I'm surprised Ed's still a Republican. But
Wasn't for Chai Baker.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Well, but
Chai
that
Baker,
that's a good point. No, but I think you brought up the point. Obviously we can't speak for Democrats, but I see in their party, it's like if you don't agree with whoever the power structure in whether it's Sanders, Clinton, Warren, if you're a more conservative Democrat, you don't. They're pushing you out. They want you to get in line in lockstep. At least, that's why I'm in.
These are this big tent that we have, right?
Well, no, but
Yeah,
but
where are you going with this?
no. My point being is that if you quit, then you cede it to the crazies.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why I'm considering now coming back into the fold, and
And there's such a disproportionate amount of crazy people
Yeah.
in politics than in any other activity or
it's very true.
yeah, it's astounding.
Gives people a platform to
Yeah.
yeah.
I feel like it's always very easy to be, if you're a moderate politically, it's very easy to be a Republican in Massachusetts. But if I was living in Oklahoma or Texas or Mississippi, I'm not sure where I would be voting. I'm from New York. I've lived in Massachusetts 9 years now, and always happy to vote for Republican support and vote for Republican politicians. Like Charlie Baker is fantastic. There's plenty of really good Republican politicians in Massachusetts, but again, if you go to other parts of the country, I don't know.
It's just much more extreme. It doesn't matter whether it's Democrats in California, Republicans in Nebraska. It's just the fact that it's much stronger. Massachusetts is not as it's solidly Democrat, but it's not solidly liberal. And I think that because of that, moderate Republicans can sort of exist in a way here that you couldn't in other states. I think Massachusetts is really strange in that way, and you can be a moderate Republican here, and it makes sense. Where I've been to the South. I mean, you go to the South. Being a Republican is something different. It's much less forgiving. You don't see anybody in government who is a moderate. That the pressure groups are all about go to the right. I mean, it's the same on the left too of Democrats. It's not different. So I think here there's room, but down there wouldn't be room for me.
My neighbor, while we're doing yard work, which is if you living in the suburbs, it has definitely grown on me. I like it a lot. I take care of my lawn, and unprompted, my neighbor came up to me the other day and he said, God, you know what? I love your guy, Charlie Baker. He's fantastic. He came out of the blue. He's like, he's just doing a terrific job. I think he's a Democrat. But the idea that a moderate Republican would be so appealing to a conservative Democrat is not that far-fetched. And we're seeing, I think, a lot of this play out because what concerns me the most, and I was actually thinking about this today, is that younger people coming up actually think Trump is the norm or normal rather than the exception. But I don't know how much of an exception he is because the defenders who I just don't have any patience for. Ed, you shared something today about his lie. What New York Times shared, literally every one of his lies since I don't know what point. I didn't get a chance to read it, but that's profoundly disappointing. And I'm trying to take a detached view of it rather than drive myself nuts with everything crazy that he does. And if I get what I get from him, that's fantastic. Whatever I don't like, I'm gonna speak up. And of course, Christian had his phone on during the podcast.
But the left is doing something that you and I both don't like. So I have a lot of friends, even very smart, educated Democrats, who are telling everybody that Trump is the logical conclusion of the Republican Party over the past 25, 30 years.
Nonsense.
It is nonsense. And actually, people I've known for years, I don't fight Democrats that often because they don't care what I think. But I really push back hard to say, look, man, I've been there for 35 years now. We were not aiming for Donald Trump. I mean, even if you like him, that's okay. I mean, okay, in this particular context, to say that I like when Trump is Republican, that's fine. We weren't building toward this. You weren't saying we're going to have a man who changed parties 5 times and who is so all over the place ideologically, who has character traits that we've never encouraged. I just think, like, even if you like Donald Trump, well, you can like him, but he's kind of his own guy, and you weren't sort of laying the groundwork for him for 20 years. That's ridiculous. But Jeff is correct. I do think some people are saying, oh, Trump, he's the Republican Party always wanted to be. And I'll say, wow, that's crazy talk. Like, if you want to be against him, hey, no one's more against him than I am, right? But I just think that, like, to say that, like, he's the culmination of the Republican brand, I want to say, yes, there are little things about him that are enabled by Republican culture. I'm with all that. But to claim that, that Ronald Reagan was one step toward Donald Trump, I want to say, holy crap, man, I was there. We were not Donald Trump. We knew Donald Trump then because I'm from New York. We were not going to say, oh yeah, Trump. He's who we're aiming for. That's crazy
Well,
talk.
What's so funny is I see some Republicans actually comparing Reagan to Trump.
That's
And
wild.
it's
That's-
like, what version of Ronald Reagan
Yeah.
are you familiar with? Because they could not be. I said to somebody on the other day, I said they could not be further diametrically opposite.
They're very different
from
men.
each other. Yeah.
At the end of the day, what the problem with both parties is they care less about ideology and they care more about power. You do whatever you can to get elected, say whatever you can to get elected. Hey, Trump found some formula, so now we're going to crawl all over that, and we're stuck with him, so we got to defend him, or we're not going to win re-election, and we're not going to get our seats. And ideology seems like it's gone straight out the window. I mean, 2 years ago, would you have found a Republican Party that was as anti-free trade as it is right now? I mean, that's
No.
Absolutely not.
Well, that is weird in a lot of stuff, but that's why it's important what we got back to a few seconds ago, because I don't know that. Well, Trump doesn't have an ideology.
No, he doesn't.
he just said stuff during the campaign that sounded good. So if it sounded good, but he doesn't have an ideology now that he's in office, it's reliant on people to stay in the party, put pressure on the people that actually make the laws and make the policy to go, no. Free trade's actually a really good thing, and let's steer Donald away from it.
I mean, I feel like there's always in American politics been that sort of populism. I mean, you can find that anywhere on both sides. You read Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail. The candidate that's most like Trump is George Wallace, Democrat.
I mean, I was gonna say something, but I forgot, so I'll let Matt talk.
I mean, I'm not. I don't think I'm as sure of the rise of Trump and where its origins are as you guys are. I think I'm a little more confused about it. What I can say is that I do think that Trump has touched the American id. I think there's a lot of what's been growing among a huge segment of our populace, which he embodies in the presidency. This idea of constant fear, constant uneasiness, especially in lower income sectors of our economy, fear of immigrants,
Fear of change.
General fear of change. And I have a real tough time saying that is anywhere connected to the Democratic Party. I can see why somebody would be, and I don't agree. I like you guys. I don't agree that it's the Republican Party. I do see how someone could make that connection. What I think the Republican Party has done for the longest time on the national level is tampered that down and been reasonable about a lot of those parts of our id. Been reasonable about immigration, been reasonable about certain parts of our economy, but about trade. But I think he's touched on that, and I don't know if it's attached to any real party. I think it's just something that is fostered by a lot of crazy people.
Do you think the one I hear most often from Trump diehards is that he fights? I mean, he trolls, he lies, he does all the other stuff, yes. But is that he fights? And he fights them, he fights the Democrats and the left in a way that they haven't seen for either ever or a long time. In the terms that, and I've been on, we've seen it on TV. I've been on TV enough where and even Ed and I get into, spars on Twitter about all the identity politics, where it's just they're castigated as white, whatever, lower class folks, and we see it now with. I like the term actually virtue signaling, but when you see liberals, our age, your age, who are constantly talking about those white people, look at that kind of separation where it's the focus on who they are, what they are, where most of America lives in somewhat integrated areas, middle of the country, Ohio, Indiana. I mean, there's. I'm not saying that it's the middle class is necessarily integrated, but there's plenty of poor white folks, plenty of poor black folks, and it's just they seem like that there's this image portrayed upon them, where we go back to the, I guess, the analysis of the 2016 election. Well, those people that were left behind in Pennsylvania, the idea of the white working class voter, and they're just saying they don't give a fuck, and this is revenge. Deal with it. No way to elect the presidency, and they don't necessarily understand the ramifications of that, but nonetheless, that's where we are. I mean, how do we get past that in terms of the dialogue that we have, where it's always broken down by some socio-economic racial category? I mean, I'm not seeing any.
I don't think you get it away from that. I think we've been dealing with that in different ways for literally 100 years since the founding. I mean, you're talking about the difference between the people in the city from the very foundation of this country. The people,
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same principle, just in a different category. They just happen to.
Well, then how do you make it better if you don't want, or do you want to make it? Does anybody want to make it better?
Well, no, I think everybody wants to make it better because those are, as you can see, that's a huge voting block. You can win an election with those people. So if you make it better for them, they'll vote for you for generations. I mean, think about FDR. I mean, the reason that, say, Catholics have been generally Democrats for the longest of time, or African Americans, that all started generally with FDR.
In the New Deal,
you make inroads with a certain group or populace, and then you can ride that election train for years.
The best example is Maine. My wife's family's from Maine. Democrats from Maine were certain that Governor LePage, who was an awful human being, could not possibly be reelected based on what a bad man he was, and they were wrong. I just think that you see that and say, are you sure about that? So people tell me, oh, Trump won't be reelected. I want to say, have you been to Maine? Are you sure about that? Like, I just think that, as you say, once people in northern Maine, Maine is very much bifurcated. The northern half is very poor, and the southern half is more like, Portland, Kennebunkport, all those places. And there's a big split. And a lot of people in northern Maine felt very forgotten. The economy is not great up there. The paper mills have all closed. And Governor LePage was a man they could relate to. And his awful politics didn't bother them because he was speaking in their language. And he got reelected. It was a three-way race again. The Democrats blew it, and they nominated him, the wrong guy. Michelle was the wrong guy to have run against him. But the reality was they thought he couldn't be reelected. And as Matt, you put your finger on that his voters were loyal, and they showed up in greater numbers a second time. Those who didn't vote from the first time said, oh, my God, he's our guy. And the voting is not intellectuals like all of us, like, we like to think of, well, these are the important issues, and these are the policies that map to them, and here are the priorities, and people will sort of like approximate that and go to the polls, and that is not what happens at all. But we like to think that because we're all so smart and educated. Yep. But I think that when you find someone saying, to people who in the country feel forgotten, either by the global economy or by the massive cultural changes or technology changes or whatever else, saw Trump and say, my God, there is an angry man who says he's mad about the stuff that I can't control, and he's my guy. And they're not saying, well, what's his resume and what are those policies? Are those really enactable? I mean, it just, I'm saying, like, there was no evaluation, and they'll vote for him again no matter what he does.
No, it's more likely they're going to vote for him because it's hard to get people to vote against someone they've already voted for because people do not like to admit they were wrong.
Absolutely.
I mean, I like the way you said that, Trump really touched on the id of America. It wasn't what he was saying; it's how he was saying it. And I at the end of the day, I think he's a snake oil salesman. He's talking about the economy. We're gonna get some tariffs, and we're gonna,
all jobs will come back.
All the jobs will come back. What I'm not going to tell you is that you're not losing your job to someone from China or Mexico. You're losing your job to a robot. I'm going to do nothing about that, but I'm at least angry, and I'm giving you an answer. Though before we say that the Republican Party was leading towards Donald Trump for 30 years, remember 2 years ago we thought Jeb Bush was going to be the nominee. So I don't exactly think that he was the inevitable guy.
Well, yeah. I got to tell you, the way I'm seeing it now, I mean, there's Seth Moulton tweeted this the other day. It's like Democrats need a message, a jobs plan, a this and that. And he's sort of right, but I almost wanted to say, but Seth, because of what you look like and who you are, your party doesn't want to hear from you. And I'm sorry, but it looks like this guy's going to get it reelected. And I think, I'm not seeing, listen, I'm not saying I want the Republicans to lose the House or the Senate or anything like that. I think they're probably the most reasonable people that can keep Trump in check. But the Democrats have not shown me anything that indicates that they're going to be doing better in 2018 or 2020, and that could change. I mean, that could change tomorrow, but they're still going back to the same playbook that got Trump elected, and I would actually put money on it as of right
And I
now.
don't think we've learned anything either, right? So I tell my friends, like, if you view Trump as an independent, it's so much easier to understand him, because than trying to say that he's a Republican in the sense that we view Republicans as being. He's the head of the party in the way that, like, you're at a company and suddenly the company's not doing well and you get a new boss you've never seen before and you're like, oh, I guess he's in charge now, but he hasn't worked here.
He's
So
the consultant.
that's right. He's the consultant who took over, or like the turnaround manager that the investors appointed, who doesn't know the business. So I do think Trump's in charge of the party, but I don't think he has a lifelong ideology. He doesn't have a series of connections in politics to nonprofits and causes and all that. So I kind of view him as an independent. So I agree that Democrats haven't done anything recognizable to adapt to a Trump-oriented politics, but I don't think the Republican Party has either. I know it sounds really weird, but I don't think we've adapted. I just think that Trump has sort of brought in populism, but we still have guys in the Congress talking about Ronald Reagan, even though he's been dead a long time. So I don't think the Republican Party is adapted either.
It's difficult to adapt when he says one thing in the morning and does a different thing in the
Hey,
afternoon.
look,
So
I'm not.
it's-
I mean, you know,
Yeah.
I just mean
It's
the fact
nailing
that
Jello to a wall.
I don't see the Republican Party saying, "Yep, we're populist now. We're going to start caring about those white working class people." Do I think the Republicans in Congress care about those people? No. And it's not like, oh, we're going to have a universal basic income. We're going to combat the opiate thing. We're going to change the trade deals. The Republican Congress hasn't done any of those things. So I just think that the Republican Party hasn't adapted either. I don't mean that's the same thing as the Democrats, but I just mean that no one's adapted to Trump. And I agree with you, Jeff, that he's not easy to adapt to. But if you just saw him as a populist, the Republican Party has not become populist. They would not be reducing Medicaid when there's so many Medicaid recipients out there in America. They wouldn't be doing that if they, for that reason alone. But they are. But because they haven't taken on Trump's priorities.
All right. It's been an interesting conversation. I'm glad I brought you guys on. Is there anything else you guys wanted to talk about? I'll open up the floor. Going once, going twice.
We could talk
right.
about. We could talk about.
Yeah, we could go on.
we
about Trump
could go on
forever,
all
yeah.
night, but you know what? We'll turn the recording equipment off and have the real fun now. Please subscribe to us on iTunes. Subscribe to us on YouTube and SoundCloud, and actually we're on all podcatchers now. I've noticed that through our analytics. This is the Lincoln Review podcast. Tom, Matt, Kristen, Christian, and of course Ed, thank you so much for joining us for a scintillating conversation. Please share this on social media and let us know what you think. Tweet at us. We'll include all our Twitter handles on the show notes. As always, it was a fascinating discussion. Thanks.
Well, now get off of Jeff's lawn.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Good night.
Thank you.